To all the students of S5 BCOM once again. In the previous video, we have started the first chapter, that is Introduction of Business Communication. In that, we have seen the meaning, definition, characteristics, and importance of communication. Today, we will continue the same process and start with the another subtopic of the same chapter, that is principles and process of communication. Today we will begin our lecture first with the principles of communication. Principles are nothing but the guidelines which are to be followed while we are communicating the information or ideas or facts to the another person. In this, first we will see the basic principles. The first basic principle is communication with an aim or an objective. One must be clear about the purpose of communication, that why a person is communicating the information to the another person. If one is clear about the objective or the purpose, it will be easier to keep irrelevant and contradictory material out of the message, making the message very precise and clear to the receiver. So the basic first principle is communication with an aim. The next principle is plan the message. The success of the encoding and decoding of a message depends upon the way one composes or organizes or plans its message. If it is a written communication, one must use simple but forceful language. If one is doing presentation, then it should be very neat and impressive one. If one is doing oral communication, then one must be brief and precise and use suitable variations in the pitch of its own voice, which makes the communication or the message very attractive. So if one does not organize the message, if one does not organize the message, then the receiver will not understand, and thus the purpose of the communication will not be served. That is why it is very necessary to plan the message very properly. The next comes message should attract attention. Whether the message is written, oral, it should be attractive to the receiver. To render the message attractive, it should be conveyed in a forceful, loud, and clear manner, as far as possible having regard to the demands of the situation. The message should be systematically arranged so that it becomes very easy for the receiver to derive the meaning of the message that the sender has sent. Okay. Now next comes message should suit the needs of the receiver. While organizing a message, a thorough study of the receiver, like his academic qualification, his intellectual level, his technological know-how, etc., should be kept in mind while we are framing the message. One cannot use the same language while communicating with an illiterate worker in a factory as one does with the director of a company, because there is difference in the intellectual capability of both. So the message should be written or should be communicated in a manner which suits the needs of the receiver. Because as a sender, we know what our message means. But while we are sending the message or writing a message or conveying a message, we should always think of the receiver while framing it, so that it suits the needs of the receiver. Okay. Now next principle comes proper selection of the medium or channel. A number of media are available for communication, but the proper selection of media or medium which suits the sender, receiver, and the message should be selected, so that there is no problem in conveying the information or message. Okay. All media cannot be equally affected in all situations. So seeing the situation, we should choose the medium or channel of communication. The next comes proper timing of the message. Many messages fail to achieve its desirable objective or result because they do not reach the person concerned at an appropriate time. If the manager is busy or about to go for a meeting or a work and one enter in his cabin to say something, then what results in? It results in inadequate message, or the message is not derived properly by the manager. So the timing should be proper while you are conveying the message. Okay. It is very difficult to proper timing. It is very difficult to time the to find a proper timing for conveying the message. But as far as possible, one must try to use. One must try to sense the proper timing while he's communicating. Okay. Now next comes barriers to effective communication should be checked. So this is the last basic principle. See, if any barriers to communication are noticed, one should try to remove them and then try to communicate. If it is not removed and you are communicating, then the communication which is received by the receiver will be very different. That is why one should check out that barrier, eliminate that barrier, and then communicate the message properly. So this is the last basic principle. Now we will see the other principles. In that, first comes principle of clarity. The idea to be communicated should be in an absolutely clear, understandable, positive and precise form. It should not be confusing. It should be easily understandable to all the levels of the management. I've told you earlier that there are 3 levels of management, that is top level management, middle level of management and the lower level of management. So the manager should know that no communication is complete unless the message is correctly understood by the receiver in the same sense in which he wants him or her to be understand. So that is why first principle is principle of clarity. Message should be clear and precise and understandable to the receiver. Next principle is principle of information. The sender must be clear in mind about how he wants to communicate. The better the communication of the speaker, the more effective the communication would be. Communication is a very systematic and continuous process of telling, listening and understanding. Hence, the communicator and the recipient should both participate in the communication process. There should be a proper or a mutual understanding between the sender and receiver so that the information is correctly flow from the sender and the receiver. So this is what your principle of information says. Principle of consistency. The actions and behavior of the communicator must be consistent with the matter of communication. The message should be consistent with the overall objectives, plans, policies, programs and procedures of the concern. There should not be a gap between the communicator says and what he does. The principle of consistency says what? You are communicating something else, but you are doing something else. So what are you doing and what are you saying should be matching. Your action should match with what you say. That's what your principle of consistency say. If there is a difference between what you are doing and what you are communicating, then it creates misunderstanding and chaos in the organization. And the message is lost somewhere. So this is what your principle of consistency says. Next comes principle of adequacy and completeness. The communication should be adequate and complete in all respects. Inadequate communication creates misunderstandings on the part of the receiver and results in delayed actions, which may spoil the cordial relationship existing between the two. Therefore, the adequacy of information being transmitted depends upon the intellectual capacity of the recipient. So the information or the message should be complete in every sense. It should not be incomplete information because it results in misunderstanding, delayed in actions of the organization, and it may result in wastage of resources too. The next principle comes principle of integration. The management should build an integrated system of communication so that the enterprise can be strengthened and may thereby enable itself to accomplish its goal within the set of framework. The executive should always attach due importance to the fact that communication is a means to an end and not an end itself. Communication to be successful must be free from personal prejudice and offensive content It should be, in fact, be cooperative in its approach. So this is what your principle of integration says. The next comes principle of flexibility. The system of communication should be flexible enough so that it can adjust to the changing requirements of the organization concerned. If there is any technological change or if there is any new method or technique adopted in the communication process, there must not be any resistance by the employees of the organization. So an organization should build such an effective communication system so that it is very flexible for the employees, so that they can adopt to these new changes or new techniques taking place in the organization in the communication process. So this is what the principle of flexibility. Flexibility means changes according to the requirement. One can change according to the requirement. That is what your basically flexibility means. Next comes principle of feedback. Communication should be based on a two-way process which provides sufficient opportunities for creative suggestions and healthy criticism from the receivers of the message. The communicator should encourage such type of communication so that he can get a true picture from the nature of the suggestions and the criticism so received from the receiver. Therefore, there should be encouragement given by the management for a free and constant flow of information in all directions. It helps to get a good feedback, which shows the true picture of the organization. So that is what your principle of feedback says. So these were the principles of the communication. Now let us see the next subtopic, that is process of communication. See, communication is a continuous process which mainly involves various elements, which we will see in the next slide. So the elements involved in the communication process can be explained in the following ways. So let us see how it works. First is the sender. The sender or the communicator is the person who generates the message and conveys it to the receiver. He is the source and the one who starts the communication. So sender is the person who starts the communication once he gets an idea or a thought in his or her mind. After that, that idea or that thought is encoded in a language which is understandable by the receiver. So basically, encoding means that the message generated by the sender is encoded symbolically, such as in the form of words, pictures, gestures, etc. before it is conveyed. So the message is converted into what? It is converted or it is encoded in a language like words, pictures or gestures, so that it can be understandable by the receiver. After that, your next steps comes is the channel or media, we can call. See, it is the manner in which the encoded message is transmitted. The message may be transmitted orally or in writing. The medium of communication includes telephone, internet, post, fax, email, etc. So the choice of medium is decided by the sender as he feels what suitable for the receiver would be. He will choose that medium which will be very easy to be used by the receiver and can be understandable by the receiver. So this is what a channel or medium means. After that, the next element comes is the decoding. See, it is the process of converting the symbols encoded by the sender. After decoding, the message is received by the receiver. So what is decoding? Decoding is whatever the message which was converted into symbols, pictures, gestures is converted into the language which is understandable by the receiver. That is what your decoding means. Decoding is the opposite of encoding. Always remember it. And then the receiver receives the message. Receiver is the person who is in the last chain and for whom the message was sent by the sender. Once the receiver receives the message and understands it in the proper perspective and acts according to the message, only then the purpose of communication is successful. So your communication process becomes successful only when the receiver understands the message in the same way the sender has meant to be. If he understands the message in the same way, he gives the feedback. Once the receiver confirms to the sender that he has received the message and understood it, the process of communication is complete by the feedback. So feedback is very important because the sender comes to know that the receiver has received the message and understood the message very clearly. So this is what your feedback is. Okay? The whole process of communication is disturbed by an element called noise. So noise is nothing but it refers to any obstruction that is caused by the sender, message or receiver during the process of communication. For example, bad telephone connection, faulty encoding, faulty decoding, inattentive receiver, poor understanding of message due to prejudice or inappropriate gestures, etc. So noise doesn't mean only mechanical things, but it can also means that receiver is not taking care of the message, or he's not understanding the message the way the receiver has, the way the sender has sent it. So these are also included in the noise. Noise is a thing which refers to the obstruction which is caused in the whole process of communication. Okay, so this is what your process of communication is. It starts with sender, encoding, message, channel, decoding and receiver. And once the receiver receives the message which is sent by the sender, he gives the feedback. And in this way, the whole process of communication is completed. And this whole process of communication is also affected by the external things which is termed as noise, which obstructs the message to be received by the receiver. So noise or the obstruction in the message in the process of communication should be avoided as possible by the sender or the receiver. Okay? That noise can be caused by the sender, by the receiver, or due to the channel, or due to the encoding, decoding. So it can occur at any point of time in the process of communication. So this was your process of communication. I hope you have understand the process of communication. It is very easy. The sender is a person who sends the message, then he encodes the message. Encoding means whatever the idea or whatever the message the sender wants to convey to the receiver, he converts it into the symbols, gestures or charts so that it can be understandable by the receiver. Then he uses a channel through which the message can be transmitted or can be sent to the receiver. The receiver try to decode the message. Decode means he try to convert those symbols and charts into a meaningful sentence or meaning so that he can understand what the sender has sent it, and ultimately he receives the message. And when he receives the message, he gives the feedback to the sender that he has received the message and so he had understood. In this way, the whole process completes once the receiver gives the feedback to the sender. And this process is also obstructed by the external factors, that is noise, which can be caused on the hands of the sender or on the hands of the receiver or at any point of time in the process of communication. So this is what your process of communication is. So today in this lecture we have seen the principles and the process of communication. Thank you.